Innate helps companies avoid project surprises, make better informed decisions, share knowledge, and deliver better outcomes. Innate, transforming the way the world builds.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's always good to have you with us. And today we've got a full house today. We've got two special guests. But before I do, Dale, I hear you are getting into the virtual reality metaverse gear. Tell me about it.
I am. Some exciting stuff we're going to be exploring on the podcast. So watch this space. Let's not give everything away, Val. I know you like to butt everyone up, all the listeners. But yeah, some really, really exciting stuff. And hopefully we'll see some guests and listeners in the metaverse fairly soon. But also, just before you get into it, we've also got the London PCG, Project Connect group, coming up end of June. So that's the 30th, folks, near London Bridge. So check that out on LinkedIn and see you there.
Oh, that's fantastic. We just had one in Brisbane last night as well. Went very, very well. So it is great to meet people physically again and have a proper conversation. But we're stuck with virtual for our guests today. So I'll introduce them one at a time. We have our veteran podcaster, Mr. Al Simmonite, joining us. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you, Val. Good to see you again.
You too, mate. And we have a new podcast, our shaky friend, Alexander Shakespeare. I think I got that right. Is that right?
That is indeed.
But for all intensive purposes, we'll be calling you Shaky from now on. So, Shaky, glad to have you on the show, my friend.
Thanks very much for inviting me along.
No problem. Now, gents, this is a great conversation, and I think we've all had these in our workplaces and environments, and I always love to start these conversations and nice and easy, right? So we can all get on a baseline, and particularly for the listeners. So I think I'll start with you, Al, around what exactly is professional collaboration, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's a way that we kind of use to describe moving away from the idea that collaboration is easy, soft, fluffy, and it's all about everybody being equal, everybody being nice to each other. Because when you work in the complex project environments, as we all have and all do, you know that effective collaboration isn't nice, easy, soft and fluffy. It's actually quite spiky, and it needs to have that hard edge to it. It needs to be about, lines and accountabilities. So we've started using the phrase professional collaboration to put some context to that, and recognize that it is something that is difficult and it requires effort.
Yeah, fantastic. And Shaky, did you want to add anything to that?
I think, it's an interesting question. So what is professional collaboration, to go through it? I think in my experience, collaboration is a word that seems to be sort of used frequently, used in many different ways, and certainly within the complex infrastructure space is used almost to say any project, any scope of work, any new procurement, we've got to be collaborative, but maybe not sort of having the understanding behind it. And I think for me, professional collaboration is around about trying to refine what that actually is without constraining it, and allowing it to evolve and develop to be what's most appropriate for the time and space. So it's not something you can necessarily copy, you can't imitate. It needs to evolve, it needs to develop. And I think, the only other thing is, as you're talking about saying, what is professional collaboration? I think, one of the things I've been realizing recently, there's a different generation coming through. And, you talk to children, one of them's at university doing business course, and he talks about a collab. And so a collab to him is how one training company or Off-White will do a deal with somebody else and bring it together. And so therefore, that whole idea of what collaboration is could be something totally different. So, I think therefore, look at the industry, look at the sector, look at where we work, people are coming into it. And there, from our perspective, maybe professional collaboration is us advanced, not necessarily saying, that's it, that's right, but that's our perspective, and that's where we come from it.
Yeah, brilliant. And look, I would be, I'm conscious that these words get thrown around a lot, right? The word collaboration is highly overused, I would say. There's a few other words that they, I know what they mean, but when people say it, there's a disingenuous element to it. When I think, as you said, companies try and force it as part of their culture or ethos. Do you find that a lot in your workspace and your work in various organizations where they've got probably the right charter, the right intent, I guess, but they're pushing I guess a disingenuous agenda. Obviously they try to link professional collaboration with some type of metric. Do you find that, Shake? I see both of you are smiling there.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting you use the word metric. So they want to be collaborative, you want to be open and be trusting, but they want a system to measure it. So let's put loads of checks and balances in, and then wonder why people aren't open and trusting, because you're trying to measure something that really can't be measured. I don't know. It's probably you said nothing's off limits. I mean, I think there's a phrase that I use, in terms of how people look at it. I probably haven't put it out there professionally, but I think sometimes it's like postings on LinkedIn. A lot of it is sanctimonious bollocks. It's it's okay, great, you say you're collaborative, right? How do you actually do that? Where does it add value? And therefore, if it's adding value and it's adding benefit, and people can be themselves, and you can have opportunity, and you can work together to common goals, and really create an atmosphere that is unique to your organization, that supports, develops, and achieves, and you can enjoy it, then actually those are things that you can celebrate, I reckon, and really enjoy, without having to say, oh, we've got to measure that each month, because that then just takes the edge off. So,
yeah, I completely agree. And just before we press record, we were talking about toxic environments, and I guess a lot of the time we inherit the culture, right? We join a new company or project, and we find that that those levels of professional collaboration are probably not at the levels we're expecting, particularly in the culture and that psychological safety, which I know we'll go into later. What do you do there for those that are listening and they find themselves in a space where they like the work but they don't like the culture? What's their go-to point? We don't all have a Shaky and Al Simmonite that we can seek guidance and wisdom. Where do we go from there, Al? I'll start with you.
Oof, crikey. Start with easy questions, huh? I think it's recognizing that collaboration or working together effectively, which is perhaps a word that or a phrase that we'd start to use because of this misnomer of what collaboration can actually mean, isn't necessarily hierarchical. It's not necessarily formally structural. So you'll know in the teams and the organizations you're working in who the people are who will be the nodes of connectivity, the nodes of influence, and they won't necessarily be the senior people in the organization. They won't necessarily be part of the strict hierarchy. There's a brilliant short video clip that we often use when we're talking about building trust in organizations, and it's and you two will be hitting your buzzword, all three of you be hitting your buzzword bingo now when I quote Mr. Simon Sinek. Go and look up the Simon Sinek video, Who's the Asshole? And it talks about building trust and high performance and low trust, and high performance, low trust, high trust, low performance, and the difference between the two. And I think it's identifying, and you can do it fairly easily. The point about Who's the Asshole video is everyone knows who the low trust person is in the team. And everyone knows who the most natural leader is in the team. So seek those people out, engage with them, make them part of your network. I think is probably the simplest piece of advice I can give to that really simple but difficult question.
Yeah, Shaggy, go. I'm looking at you with anticipation.
Yeah. Well, I'm about to wait to hear what I've got to say. I'm just excited. I think. A good question, and I just reflect on it. So, if you've got somebody working, really enjoy what they do, but then what's their go-to place if they're in that environment that is unpleasant? And I think their go-to place is the front door, and you walk out. And I say that from two reasons. Having been in an organisation that I thought at the time was what I wanted to do and enjoyed it. But actually, when I look back at it and look at the approach and look at the attitude and way people spoke to, it wasn't right. And just when I walked out the door, it was just relief to go. And so I would really question, if you enjoy some job, but you're working in an area, because it's people are people. And I think I was listening to an interview and talk show the other week on the radio. I was driving somewhere, and it was talking about women's health in the workplace. And I thought something really insightful, and one of it was talking about the demographics change of over the recent generations, and more sort of females in the workplace that haven't been before. And I said something I thought was just insightful, and I think it relates to your question, is that if you work in a project or wherever it is, then you enjoy the job, but you don't enjoy that environment, the culture you're in. There'll be plenty of other people who or organizations will have a similar role, but have that culture and environment you want to work in. And I think the whole demographics of working, so going back to what you're saying and your question, I would say, where do people go? And I appreciate it's not easy, and there's a lot of other issues that come into it, but I think you'll find something else. But it's having that courage and maybe taking the risk to make that jump, to make that leap. And maybe that is very hard, but find someone you trust, find someone you respect, and recognize that there will be somewhere else where you will be respected and you will have that environment you look for to give you that same project working experience.
Yeah, fantastic.
Sorry, Val, before you jump back in, I think the other point about that, to reinforce what Shaky said there and what I said, is when you create those informal networks and you tap into those people, then those are connections that will stay with you beyond that job and that organization. And I just say that looking at the two of you on this podcast, we know each other through work, but we've made connectivity and friendship and the relationship that's transcended probably 3 or 4 different organizations between us now. And I think that's the point about once you've got that like-minded that connection, then hold on to it.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's the informal network. I think Joe Lucas was talking about the mycelium effect and having this kind of, I guess, playing field. The community isn't that big either, and I always find it interesting. And I think COVID, just hearing your thoughts back, COVID gave us a reason to step back. A lot of people, I think, and there's certain terms like the Great Reset and the Great Resignation, but I don't think it's that great. But it is allowing people to reassess. I don't think we've ever really maybe we've never given ourselves individually that time and space to think, as you said, Shaky, do we take the front door, or do we stay in an environment which isn't really appreciating the work that I contribute to this project? And we're finding that a lot of people now, because there are opportunities elsewhere, that they're moving along. This is the case in Australia. I'm not sure in the UK and elsewhere, but it's I think it's a great thing. And so, turning my inspiration or my insight back into the leaders, then the other question I had for you, gentlemen, is around our leaders in the business, who probably for a large part of it haven't necessarily been equipped with the right tools and training. I find like a lot of toxic leaders, and I've had quite a few. You're right, Al, you're safe. But I've had a few toxic leaders that have that I cannot understand the behaviors. It's almost like a shocking experience, and it leaves you kind of speechless, I think, in certain situations. And I wonder where it comes from, because I've always got this mindset of curiosity. I wonder why they are, because I had this presupposition that people aren't their behaviors. There's something that's driving that. But do you believe, just to kick this off in a gentle way, maybe Shaky, you first, we are training our leaders correctly in this professional collaboration space?
Are we training them correctly? I think if you're talking about professional collaboration, and you say that phrase, you're talking about this space and operating in this way, I think you don't train people. You can train someone to operate a piece of equipment. You can train somebody to deliver a certain product. But I think what this is about this learning and development over time, developing yourself, developing a team. So, you've got to start with self, you've got to do that within a team context, and then do that within an organization. And so therefore, yes, you can attend training courses, but I think this is something that's a lot more conceptual. It's about balancing both the tangible aspects of the skills, the attributes you need, but also I think what you're alluding to is, if I've understood you correctly, is that, if you have people that may be using that phrase, are toxic in their leadership or they're detrimental, then actually is there something more than what meets them? So is it the fact that they're under pressure? Is it the fact that they don't feel that they have the respect of others, or they have to behave in a way because of expectations either they put on the plate themselves or the pressure they're on? And because they're the leader, traditional view, they see it as hierarchical, and therefore, they lack the ability to be vulnerable with their team. And maybe if they have that opportunity to step back and look at themselves in the mirror, is that a way then to start, if you start to manage and take note of your feelings, then I think that's an awareness inside that is not about training, but that's about who we are as individuals and who we are as humans, and being someone to try and do something. And then you learn and develop from that. So I think it's more about, if you want a better phrase, being a reflective practitioner, to reflect on the situation. What motivated me to do that? What was the situation? What did I learn from? What did I benefit? What would I do if it's something different? And then it takes time, and you therefore have to develop it as opposed to necessarily train for it. But there maybe means you train to do certain techniques or something. But that's part of a more of a overall conceptual approach, I would say.
Yeah, that's great. If I can jump in there, Shaky, your internet connection's slightly shaky, but we're getting what you're putting down there, so that's great.
It's part of the English leader, you see. He doesn't have to say every single word we interpret.
Exactly. Oh, I just wanted to comment on a couple of things you said there that lately I've been thinking about. You mentioned, sort of like-minded folks. I'm beginning to think I'm actually seeking out unlike-minded people.
Yeah.
So people that think opposite to me, that I can learn from, but have the same values. So that's the commonality. So that's one thing I'll put down. But then I also wanted to bring it back to, we spoke a lot about what professional collaboration is. And how is that different to any other type of collaboration? Because ultimately for me, and this is, I guess, me playing a bit of the devil's advocate, we are all human. And in any situation, we are still human, regardless if we are our professional selves or other. And so I just wonder, what's the nuance between a professional collaboration and anything else?
Yeah, I think, and fair game for picking me up on that, because I think I used the phrase or the words like-minded, but what I actually meant was probably like-hearted.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely spot on with the alignment of values and the need or the benefit in seeking out people who have different perspectives but still share the same common value set. And I totally agree with that. And but professional collaboration, why is it professional? Because it's in pursuit of the professional outcomes, and it's recognizing that you don't have to do all of collaboration all of the time. It's a scale, and within the context of a professional collaboration within let's take the complex project environment as the framework here. You don't have to do everything fully collaboratively. There are points of time where it's possible to be transactional. It might be actually the most optimal solution to be transactional, because that's the most efficient way of doing something, relatively straightforward. But all of that is done in pursuit of achieving the outcomes and the benefits that thing, that project, that asset is there to deliver. So there's lots of things that we would do, I think, that are exactly the same as you would want to behave in a non-professional environment. But the point about professional collaboration is it's very directly linked to achievement of the outcomes. And I think that goes back to this idea of collaborative leadership, which is another phrase that I absolutely hate, because again, it's, what does that actually mean? I'm talking about the idea of, collaborative leadership is dead, because collaborative leadership is just leadership. And Val, you asked about the paradigm shift. Well, what I heard you say was the paradigm shift in leadership from where we used to be, perhaps to where we're starting to head, and those people who are perhaps caught between those two paradigms, not sure how to move forward. I think that's a point where we really need to be start looking at the next generations about what their perspectives are. And some of us are getting to the end of our curve now, and we need to open our minds and be, as Shaky said, be vulnerable, be a bit more humble, and recognize that we don't know it all. And I think the biggest shift in leadership, brackets collaborative leadership, is recognition that as leaders we don't know it all, we can't know it all, and not knowing it all isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, agreed. And thanks for clarifying that, Shaky. And I guess if I think about it, professional collaboration is actually aided by the non-professional collaboration that you do in the pub, or at times even the unprofessional collaboration that you might do. But yeah, I wonder if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think Al's phrase, it's probably dead. And I just made me realize, we're talking about this word professional collaboration. So we've come up with it as a means to sort of support and challenge ourselves and our clients in the work we do as a consultancy. And actually, that work is about supporting and challenging those teams, those projects to deliver in complex infrastructure projects where millions of pounds are at stake. And so therefore we've probably added to the whole management guru sort of list of just another phrase to add to the mix. And therefore, actually, I think as Al was saying, I agree. If you take people talk about collaboration and project. Well, if you can take a JV, you can take an alliance, and depending what that commercial contract is and where the pain share and gain share is, that can change the level of what I call professional collaboration requires. And, I have an experience where I presented this at a workshop and everyone was looking and said, oh, yeah, we do professional collaboration, and said, we don't need to do that, and said, or us do it. And I said, okay, so it moved on. And then it came out that, one side thought the other side were just operating the way to get their gain share. So, classic demonstration of there was no vulnerability, there's no ability to challenge and deal with those contentious issues. So, I think professional collaboration is very much focused in it, rather than my earlier comment, my children talking about trainer and designers and musicians come up with it, they call it a collab. And so it is that sense. I think the last thing I was thinking about, and Al's, your phrase about, is it dead? And coming back to yourself, Dale, about meeting other people and trying to reframe that. Maybe, the next thing is we need to move away from, using the word professional collaboration. Actually, if you just do the things that, makes us people, makes us human, and listen and share and all the rest of it without some of our frailties. And I, stick my hand up. I probably, I've made a lot of the mistakes myself over the years, and, still do. But I think that openness to that, then actually we don't need collaboration. We don't need professional collaboration. We just who we are. But I think maybe that's a little bit of a utopia, beyond the realms of possibility.
Well, it's good to have something to aim towards, to keep pushing ourselves and keep driving ourselves. And, we've kind of danced around a little bit, and we did mention before hitting record around, psychological safety, another potentially managerial buzzword, but there is some substance, I believe, in that. And something that I was really keen when exchanging messages with Al around psychological fitness and what that actually means in conjunction with safety. Because for me, and this is where we can get into maybe a bit of a debate about what it all means, but for me, the psychological safety is that environment, that sort of that framework upon which we can be vulnerable, be ourselves, share, not fear failure, etc., etc. And then perhaps fitness is the sort of mental fatigue we find in pressurized situations. When we're at our worst, are we fit enough to still be productive and collaborative and have empathy? I don't know. And this is the space I love to go into, to explore. So Al, please, let's continue the conversation that we had from earlier.
Yeah, I think there's a number of dimensions that you picked up on there. One is the fitness of the team, and psychological safety is a concept, but it's only relevant if it's applied to, again, it's the same conversation around professional collaboration, only if it's applied to the project and the outcomes. So is the team safe psychologically or otherwise, and then is that being used to generate the outcomes, where that's the psychological safe becomes psychological fitness to deliver the outcomes. And you touched on things like resilience and well-being and all those other dimensions, which go to the much broader, how does the team form, how does the team work, how do the individuals operate within it. And I think the other point is psychological safety, psychological fitness, the ability to challenge, the ability to speak up, they're all two-way processes. So as leaders, we might believe that we're generating an environment of safety, but if the people around don't feel the same, then it's not psychologically safe. It has to be, it's like empowerment. Empowerment is given, but it also has to be received to be effective. So I think that's the point of really about recognizing the two-way activity. And once you've got that two-way connectivity, top down, bottom up, and that's aligned, then I think you're moving the team towards the team being psychologically fit to then deliver the outcomes in an effective way.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting to ponder about, Shaky. And I wonder how we, I guess, encourage that two-way connectivity where, we all like to think if we're in a leadership position, I'm empowering my people, I'm empowering my staff members. How do we then ensure that they're actually taking up that offer, if we can put it that way?
I think, well, first of all, you don't empower them. And I say you don't because if I'm going to empower you, I'm going to say, Dale, you're empowered. I've got the control. As much as I can give, I can take it away. So I think it is creating that, use the phrase, I think you or Hal have creating that time and space, allowing people to decide what they need to empower themselves on. And you may need to put some constraints and boundaries and focus around that, and you need to allow them to make mistakes and allow them to see how that goes. And it comes back to the sort of the professional collaboration. Al said it's not pink and fluffy and various things, and an element, another phrase I've used and I picked up from somewhere, it's the idea of ruthless compassion. And sometimes it is hard, and you do have to resolve contentious issue, and people do not perform and they do not behave in a way. And if you don't allow that to be managed, and if you don't deal with it appropriately, then that issue will fester, that issue will go on, and people think that becomes the unwritten rule. Oh, we can do this if it doesn't really matter. So I think I'm sort of losing track of where you started the question, but I think in terms of it's that empowerment is then the psychological safety is. Do you have the bonds, the identity, the sense of belonging, the ability for people to sort of raise their concerns and deal with things in a way? And I think maybe two sort of little bits, if I can sort of prolong a little bit, maybe to add back. So the psychological safety is, there's people greater than me and who've written books on this and pushed it and all the rest of it and shared it and all the rest of it that I could never even dare to sort of stand on the same stage, or I'd love to talk to them and listen and learn. But I think the idea of the psychological fitness and so therefore something I picked up from a yoga book I was following, and it talks about in yoga about mobility and flexibility. So I think this is where if you take it as a project, so in yoga, do you have the flexibility to hold a downward dog, and how do you have the flexibility also to hold a cobra or a sun salutation or warrior, whatever it is? But then what you also need is the mobility to move from one to the other, in the same way as a project needs to be in different spaces at different times and behave in different ways. So I say psychological fitness is not only having the time and space that's there, but then having the attributes, the resources of knowing when you need to flex one way and push another way. And I think so. So the other one, then, I draw your attention to, and I just to really summarise. So, if you're following sport in the UK, Liverpool won a football match against Chelsea on penalties, and a sports psychologist, I think it was a Norwegian commentator, psychologist, put on Twitter, and I should have had his name. I should credit him. It's absolutely great. But shows little film clips. So in the 5 minutes that there was that Jurgen Klopp had to brief his team, he briefed each of the penalty takers individually, and he was able to discuss. So if he told them, this is my idea, this is obviously well, we don't know what he told them, but the idea was that it was indicated. He told them. So he did that in a psychologically safe way. He was the manager directing. He did all that within a minute and a half. He then had 3.5 minutes to just cajole, to build, to deal with the pressures and get people ready. Compare that with the Chelsea manager, who didn't have that organised, and he briefed people and spoke to them in the forum. So behaviourally, if they disagreed, if they didn't like what they're hearing, they're not necessarily going to speak up. And if they don't, I'd say there's not a psychologically safe environment. So there's a number of different attributes there, both the skill of Klopp to be able to deal with it personally, but actually who had the psychological safe environment, but also then who had the psychological fitness to actually make that apply when the pressure was on. And there we are.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love a sports analogy, and I was actually thinking, when I thought about psychological fitness while you were talking there, on test match cricketers, and particularly batsmen, and those that have the psychological fitness to concentrate ball by ball, switch on, switch off, day after day if they're good enough. And we love to draw on sports because elite sportsmen are absolutely amazing. They are next level. But I want to bring Val back into this well, because I know he loves his sports. What's your take on psychological fitness, Val, and what do you want to add to it?
I don't like sports, Dale. I don't know what you're talking about. I find it the most bizarre. I find it the most bizarre thing to watch other people kick things around. It's a complete strange thing that we do. But I do find that it's interesting around. And I was just writing, because I do a lot of data and digital work, right? And that's an interesting envelope of persistent labor, let's call it, because sometimes you can't see the benefits or the value. And I was thinking, they have the common data environment, and I think, wouldn't it be great if we had a common human environment? And it talks to this collaboration and this professionalism that we all think is a natural state of the human condition, right? We've been doing this for a very long time, and it got me thinking about the military, because I'm ex-Navy and the office environment, and so I feel like, and Al will probably have some points on this as well. The effectiveness of being in the military is we had a clear understanding of why we were there, the vision and the mission and the purpose. We had a clear benefit of understanding the connection of what our role was in relation to that. And when I look at projects, I feel like we're more tribal in projects. We seem to look after our own, but no one else. Yeah, sure, we might have professional collaboration, but it'll be in a team of 3 rather than the entire program. And as you know, in complex projects, Shaky and Al, you're talking hundreds, maybe even thousands of people, lots of interfaces, lots of different value sets. How do we break or erode that down? That was my first question. And where is the differentiator? Like, how can we take some of those military elements and apply them without being too militant about them, Al? And my follow-up question. Actually, no, I'll stop there. I'll let you digest that one first.
Remember the second one. I just like to come back to project and data, by the way, not project and data. But there we go.
Thank you very much.
And I'll let Shaky come on the back of this, because he's also ex-military, but with a different colour. So we've got all 3 colours represented here.
Brilliant.
So where do we take the military? I think slightly oxymoronically here, it's not the structure of the military that I think is important. It's the use of structure within the military hierarchy that actually enables the psychological safety, and I think that does vary between the different environments, between the different services, and there are, and Shaky and I talk about this lots. There are different environments within the army, particularly where some of that is much more robust and structured and intentionally so, and there are other areas where there is that more freedom. So if I go to my experience as sort of the engineering community, the difference between roles and experience and responsibility, I think, is very clear. You just have to look at someone's shoulder to see where they sit. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the hierarchy is where the experience and the knowledge sits. So I would know that I could not compete in terms of, compete's the wrong word, but compare with the technical experience of the people who worked for me. And likewise, they knew that I had particular responsibilities in terms of decision making. So I think it's back to, and it's the word that I wanted to get in, and now's the opportunity to do it. We've talked about this whole concept of professional collaboration, which is accountability, and it's the clarity of accountability. And I think that's where, from a military perspective, in my experience, that's one of the things I think we can bring into this complex project space. But maybe I'll ask Shaky to sort of come back at that with a green perspective rather than a light blue perspective.
Yeah, I think really how best to answer. I think one of the things from my experience, and if you take strategy as a whole, a lot of planning from the military over decades, even centuries, modern strategic thinking, came from the military. I mean, I think the last couple of years, business organizations and people talk about how we operate in a VUCA world, this idea of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, but VUCA came from the US military, I think, in the late 80s, early 90s, as a means to think, well, how are we going to operate in, well, funny old thing with Ukraine happening at the moment, but at the time in the late 80s, the Berlin Wall coming down and the end of the Soviet Union in the early 90s. And so I think, the military as an entity and how it's gone, I think one of the things, and go back to your comment about training, is, as Val, I'm sure you'll know, is, it's a huge amount of time and effort into training, into development, both when you join your career, when you start, when you go through it, if you're promoted or you go on a different trade course. And then you have units going on operations, and then you go through a whole host of training again, and you've got years of culture and organizations to bring it together to build on. And so therefore I think in that sense, I think what complex projects can do, and maybe as you bring in the military, is less about really focus on what they've done, but what can we learn from what they're doing? Because I don't think industry or the complex projects haven't got the time, the resource, and there's not the return. You could spend if you spend all that money and time on development of people, you're never going to get them to deliver a project. So I think maybe going back, and this is why I like the sports analogy, because I think from my perspective, in sport and looking at sporting teams or events, it's you can distill it down. And actually, I was talking to a colleague recently, and he very much, I looked at it and I took one thing, he took something else out of it from more. You've got a very structured approach, a bit more project management skills there. So I think it's trying to find something that's appropriate. We can observe what they did, how they did it. But then we need to, going back, I think, to what Dale was saying, we need to reframe that and bring it to ourselves, because otherwise the risk you import it in. And I think this is going back to the sporting analogy. You see one team, one set of conditions, one manager absolutely works perfectly. Then another team buys that manager, say in football, I think, where you see it, they put it in there and it doesn't work. It's an absolute failure. And I think, it's those uncertainties. So I think, without showing any cynicism, I think, yes, there's a lot of positives there. There's also some negatives, but actually, it's what we learn from it and reframe it rather than thinking, oh, that works, so let's import it across and get on with it.
No, good points there, gents. And one more that I was going to bring up before was around just playing devil's advocate, as Dale often does, on the psychological safety spectrum. So, is there a point where perhaps we make it too safe. And I akin this to contextually around children, right? There is a very big concern that if you coddle your children, if you make them too safe, if you don't allow them to make mistakes, if you don't allow them to fall forward, if you don't allow them to, you know, scratch their knees and fall off their bikes, you're actually doing some real damage to their development. Do you think that still applies in the context of complex projects, that we could potentially be making it too safe for these teams, or we're not allowing them to make mistakes, perhaps? Shaky, start with you.
In the short answer, yes. To maybe slightly extend it. So again, let's go back to my earlier comment. You know, within yoga, there's something, you know, and the idea of the body is about tensegrity, and is about the coherent sort of tension. And actually, Al's seen me do this. I was talking with a team and running a project, and I'd had a large rubber band, the type of thing you may use in the gym to do sort of assisted heaves with. And I got, and so if you can imagine, we're all connected, and we've got that rubber band. And if I just hold it and someone else has hold it and it's loose, there's no tension. Then we could all, you know, I could do something and they could do something, and nothing's going to change. You know, we're just a loose and a blob and all the rest of it. So, you know, maybe that would be a way of describing that. You know, you've got too much psychological safety. But then we start to pull it, we walk out and we're holding this rubber band up. And if you can imagine, if I describe it, you know, we then start to have a little bit of a tension. And so there's a point where I can move, but there's some stretch and there's some movement in the band. So, you know, Val, if I had that band with you now, metaphorically, if I pull, you may not move, may not do something to you, but it's going to put some tension. You're going to know I'm doing something different. And then you start building that up. So it's, how do you have that systems and systems? And then if I keep on moving and you don't move, you're static, there's going to start coming a time when that rubber band loses its flex. It can't stretch anymore. It'll then become brittle and it breaks. And if that breaks, then all collaboration and any connection you and I have got is gone. So I think what it's about, and it goes where to what's most appropriate. How do you do it? How do you create it? You can't imitate it. Then it's finding that place which is appropriate at that time for the conditions you have in your project, the stage you're at, where you have sufficient tension. So conflict is a positive, but it's not the negative way, as you said about the toxic. If you don't have enough, then you know, people just do their own thing and it all becomes a bit of a riot and you know, chaos. If you have too much, then it breaks because it's brittle and it's damaged. So, you know, it's trying not to sit on the fence and it's not balanced and meet in the middle, but what's appropriate and create sufficient that works at that time, but recognize it needs to constantly evolve and it needs to constantly flex and adjust.
Yeah, great. Al, what do you think?
I'm going to take a slightly different perspective on that. Not to disagree with anything Shaky said, because I agree with it, but I think that the other point about can there be too much psychological safety? I don't think there can, so long as the boundaries are very clear and it's not an excuse, which it can be seen as, in the same way that collaboration can be seen as an excuse to be, you know, all in it together and to avoid accountability. Psychological safe environments are not an excuse to be reckless or negligent or lazy. So it has to operate within an environment of accountability, and those guidelines, those guardrails or handrails, as we would describe them, have to be absolutely clear. So a clear and common purpose, the agreed sense of identity, that all pushing in the same direction, all have to be in the same environment and part of the same conversation as having that, whatever that psychologically safe environment looks and feels like in that particular team. And there's a little video clip that we use, or I use, when I'm talking about psychological safety, which is a TV program where someone comes into a new role, and one of the first things they do is they fire half of their staff because they're not following the guidelines. And then the next thing he does, he goes, right, I'm here to help. How do I, as a servant leader, support you in delivering the outcomes? And it's a complete change from one extreme to the other, but it's then generating, you see that the sort of the language and the body language and the verbal language in that team. Yes, it's a drama, it's a bit scripted, but I think the point is well made. Shifting into starting to challenge, starting to throw ideas into the mix, but in a very clear context.
Yeah, fantastic. And you mentioned something there that I was actually going to touch on. You mentioned servant leadership, and I think, does that still aptly remain? Is that still a modern term that is used that well describes the type of leadership that we need in complex projects, or you think there's a more refreshed, updated version of that?
I think yes, I think it's still relevant, whether it's still called that, and I think that there is perhaps a sense that the term itself might be passé, but fundamentally the role of leaders is to encourage and shape the environment for teams to deliver outcomes. And whether you call that servant leadership, whether you call that humble leadership, whether you call that collaborative leadership, I don't necessarily think the terminology, we talked earlier on about, overloaded management speak. I don't think any of that actually matters what you call it. What matters is how you cast the right shadow as a leader, or as someone said the other day, shadows are dark, so how do you shine the right sunbeams? Maybe that's a bit pink and fluff in its own right, I don't know, but how do you create that environment where you can be the role model leader? And that's not necessarily the inspiring charismatic leader. We can't all be charismatic, we can't all be inspirational, we can't all be extrovert. I'm listening to, rather than reading at the moment, a book called Quiet, and I can't remember the lady's surname, but it's Susan somebody or other is the author, apologies, which is all about understanding the introvert extrovert dimension, and where the value comes in that quiet reflection and that solo working. So almost the direct opposite of what we in our minds think of as collaboration, which is all in an open plan office, all shouting and talking to each other, and brainstorming and writing, and it's all happening collectively. That's not necessarily where the real innovation and energy for new ideas comes from. So we've got to recognize there's a whole different set of experiences and environments that we need to bring to bear in delivering the best outcomes.
Yeah, great. Shaky, anything to add to that?
I think the one comment is I think it's the phraseology and the term. I mean, maybe the term has been misused or misunderstood. I mean, and I think it's, I mean, the realms of leadership and defining that, and what is a good leader and what isn't, and the rest of it. And sometimes the leader is going to gain as much as the individuals that they're responsible for leading, and there's different ways to motivate and gain that. And there's times where sometimes it has to be more direct, and it's not about being the servant type leader as you go through there, but there is a sense that directness may be appropriate in certain conditions with the team, that psychological safety is built up so you can do that, but then there's other times where it's not. So it's about, and people look sometimes to the leaders, to those for the confidence, for that direction. So I think I think in summary, it's, as Al said, I think his phrase was, the words, maybe the phrase has become a little bit passé, but it's about sort of what's the granularity, what's the rigor, what's the ruthlessness involved in that, but in a way that is dialed in a way, going back to what we said earlier, that we're all humans, so let's treat people as humans and respect them for what they were. And you can still lead that way and still be direct with it, but also be compassionate.
Yeah,
by the way, we were definitely going to be stealing the idea of the common human environment, Val. So yeah.
Well, this is what this podcast is all about, Al. I think we've had many guests on board that have just through the process of talking, isn't it, and not necessarily having the same perspective, these ideas pop in. I know Dan Patterson's had a few. We've had definitely talks about similar conversations with some of your peers, Al. But I wanted to go back as well on the title before handing over to Dale for a few more. We started with this great title of Silent Discussions, and it reminds me of a conversation we only recently had with Dave Snowden about silent listening. I think it was that right, Dale? Did I get that right? And I thought that's interesting. So silent discussions, I guess, for the listener, for the common listeners who follow us, what does that mean, and how is that applied? Al, I'll start with you, mate.
Yeah, so it's a concept that was developed in our business, predated both Shaky and myself, but this idea that we all recognize, I'm sure, that the points in time where we've been in a discussion, been in an environment, there's been that little niggling, nagging voice at the back of the head trying to tell you something. And it can be as simple as the guy in front of me or the person in front of me doesn't know what they're talking about, it's completely utter rubbish. I've got no respect for them, and I'm going to go and check my email, or I'm going to go and switch off. Or actually, as we've had in workshops where the SID, as we call it, the silent internal discussion at the back of the head is, I've got to go and pick my kids up from school, I've got to leave early, I'm worried about getting that into the conversation. So the point about silent discussions is they're things that distract us from really focusing on the point of the conversation, the point of the project. And the more that those voices build up in the back of our head, the more distracting it becomes, the less focus you have. So all we say is, and I guess it leads back into creating the environment where you can have open conversations, whether you call that psychological safety or not, I frankly care less. It's that environment. You get it out of the back of your head, stick it on the table and talk about it. So that's the background to the concept of what we call silent internal discussions. But when you start to then share them, and again, it's back to that idea, there's no such thing as a stupid question, there's no such thing as an unspoken thought. If you can get those out there in a safe environment with the right language and behaviors around them, then all sorts of things start to cascade out, and ideas start to flow, and problems start to then be shared and solved. So it's all about creating the environment, frankly. And Shaky, I'm sure will come in and sort of build on that. And I've just got a cat joining me, so you're fifth member of the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, silent internal discussions. I mean, we use it as SID. We've got a little cartoon character, and certainly it's a way sometimes to sort of start a workshop to allow people. You arrive at our conference room as a consultant standing there, and everyone think, what's going on? Quite simply, get people to share their SIDs, and I sort of paraphrased as Nancy Klein, who wrote the book Time to Think. And I remember I've seen her operating and had a session with her, and there's a great mnemonic she used. I learned from her called "Wait, why am I talking?" And very much that challenge. And I often ponder it, but certainly I've seen practical sense. I've used SIDS just in the phrase you used, ask people, what are you thinking, feeling, and want to say, and you give that person that opportunity to tell you what they want to, but also they can decide whether they want to or not. So that it's that openness, and it's about I go back to, I think, what you said about was it silent listening? I think that would be silent listening, because then you listen. And I think, but really, when we then bring it back to where we are and talking about it in complex projects and using SIDS, I think it's a number of things. It's a real belief that conflict will enable improvement. And you've got to respect yourself and others. So it is as much as I need to share my SIDS and you listen, but then when I listen to yours, I've got to switch mine off. Maybe in a way here, you're asking Al and I the same question, but we come up with different answers. We come out with different things. So what's driving my answer? What's driving Al's answer? And then it's we've got to have that competence with it. So we've got to switch off our SIDS. I need to listen generously. I need to be curious. I need to be inquire, because if I am curious about what you're saying, going back, I think, Dale, you were saying you want to find people have a different view to you or perspective, but have similar values. The only way you can listen and understand is do it unfiltered by your own perception, because otherwise we bring all our SIDS to bear, and then perception becomes our reality. And if you can have that clarity, communication, that safe space, psychological, professional collaboration, deal with the deal with the hard situations, then you can be successful, because what will happen? Both parties will benefit. They've listened, they've shared. They walk away from that. They've resolved issues or problems. That's why that happened. But also, I think more importantly, they're better able to deal with the next challenge. And therefore, bring it back around to, where we started with this professional collaboration. If you do that and you get a better outcome, and that outcome then gives a value and benefit, and you think, right, that worked, you're more likely to do it again. And then SID, professional collaboration, all these things just disappear in the background. And that becomes your new routine. That becomes the new pattern, the habits of behaviors that you display. And then, if you want a better phrase, consultant, my job is done.
Amazing. It just brings me back. Val and I have discussed often that this podcast has enhanced our listening skills, because people don't believe it still, but we start every single podcast with a blank piece of paper. We have no pre-written questions, no script, and we have to listen, right? We have to listen. And there's this saying that we've all heard, and my daughter's heard for the first time tonight, is we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we have to listen twice as much as we talk. And I think it's quite an important lesson, quite a basic one that we do need to follow. But I just want to comment, you're all talking about servant leadership a little bit earlier, and I think servant leadership doesn't mean subservient. It actually means I'm serving you in the way I think is best for you. And sometimes that means, I think we said it, being more directive, right? And then that reminded me of Morgan Freeman when he played Nelson Mandela in Invictus, where he said one part where everyone disagreed with him, to keep the Springbok emblem because it was a sign of apartheid. And his response was, "You elected me to lead you. Let me lead." And it could be as simple as something like that. And I don't know if Nelson Mandela ever said that. Maybe he did, but I know Morgan Freeman did. Anyway, but I guess just back to it, we could also bring in the whole equation of bias, unconscious bias, subconscious bias. That's a whole new rabbit hole we could potentially go down when we're listening to people. That filter that we may or may not have. The ability to turn it off is another thing as well. So there's so many topics here, and we'd probably have to get you gents back for another one. But just around accountability as well, I think that's key. We danced around it slightly, but accountability is something that oftentimes I think most people working in teams think that it's the manager or the leader's role. They're accountable. But actually everyone has a certain level of accountability. And I think that's probably an element that when you think about that psychological safety is, well, you're actually accountable for your action. Don't wait on others. You are the team, And so, yeah, if I come to you, I don't know if you wanted to explore just a little bit more before we sort of head towards the end of the pod, and I'll come to Shaky next, around this notion of accountability and what that actually means. Because another word, we just sort of bounce around the office at times, or the virtual office, and no one truly actually understands it. I don't know if I truly understand it at times.
You're absolutely right, and I think I love the fact that you both, as planners and project controllers, come to these things completely unprepared. Sorry, wrong word. Maybe I said that unintentionally. But knowing you both as I do, I'm not surprised.
That's Sid.
So yeah, that's my Sid. Yeah, accountability is one of those wonderful words where if you sit in a team in a project and you say everyone needs to be accountable, you'll get lots of nodding heads. And then you go, what are you accountable for? And then you'll get tumbleweed. So accountability is great when it's everybody else. And it's not so easy when it's you, because that's the sticking point. And I think that's the real distinction between highly effective team environments, and I'm avoiding the use of that C word there, which is recognition of individual accountability by the individuals, not necessarily the leaders. And that's a difficult thing to do. Let's be honest. And a lot of things we've talked about in this session are great to discuss and easy to say. They're actually very difficult to do. Create a psychologically safe environment. Yeah, easy words. What does that actually mean when you translate that into what are you actually going to do as an individual, as a team member, as a team, to move that dial, to change the conversation from where you are now to where you want to be tomorrow, the next day, because human nature kicks in, and it's very difficult to say I am presently putting myself in a situation where if I don't do the things that I'm accountable for, I could lose my job, or I could get moved to a different role, or I could be seen to fail, because we have an operating culture in the professional project environment where we don't like to be seen to fail, because that's our career and that's our CV. So I don't necessarily think I've answered your question directly, but I think I will say it's a really difficult thing to enact well. And the things that make it work are always very much around the environment. And Shaky said this earlier on, it's about not making repeatable, move the manager of one football team to another, they'll be successful, then they'll fail, then they'll be successful again. It's about recognizing all the characteristics of the environment, and that's all about the constituent members, the individuals, the situation, the projects, etc. So I probably have avoided answering the question, so I've probably avoided my own accountability answering it.
No, I love it. It's great because they are hard topics to talk about and really truly get to the heart of, and everyone will have a slightly different definition. And that brings me to you, Shaky. What is your definition, or did you want to add, contradict, Al? I mean, feel free.
What is my definition of accountability? Wow. I mean, do you know, I was dreading you asking me this question, but I was, because I talk about it so often and talk about, accountability and responsibility. And now I'm put on the spot. I tell you what, I'll come back. Let me come back to something that Val asked about earlier on, and the idea of pressure and various things like that. So there's a guy called David Aldred who he's got a concept called teacup, thinking clearly under pressure. And he's again a coach, works in the sports environment, and famously, he's probably one of his most famous clients was Johnny Wilkinson, and kicking coach, and when he kicked the drop goal for the 2003 Rugby World Cup win, and he's worked with all sorts of sportsmen, sportswomen, and golfers in recent success. But one of the things I think he did in terms of this drill is putting a net just in front of the ball. So when Johnny Wilkinson was practicing kicking, the ball, it stopped as soon as he kicked it. So, Johnny had total responsibility, you could say, and accountability for that action, for doing that. And that was his part of the team. But actually, again, bring about what he wanted them to do was focus on that which he was accountable and responsible for, or, that was in his sphere of control. As soon as the ball had left his boots, that was it all over. That was where it finished. So I think, and if it didn't go over, was he responsible for it not going over? Well, in some sense, yes, he was, because he was the kicker. But actually, he was just one of a team of 15 that enabled him to get into that position. So I think if we're talking about the sort of, where we're going with this idea of professional collaboration, psychological safety and fitness, et cetera, I think in summary, I would say it's not a single entity, accountability and responsibility. It's something that needs to be invested as us all individually. And we need to play our part, and we need to do that in a way that we share our vulnerability. And so therefore, if people make a mistake, it's about sharing that and allowing that to land in a way that people are not going to sort of challenge you back on something. And so I think in that instance, and just think about now, probably waffling a little bit, losing my train of thought, but it's incredibly hard to do. And maybe going back to what you said, Al, you said very easy to say, but actually even now, so I'm thinking in reality, what does it mean? And so it's about context and the rest of it. And I think maybe what is it? Is this just having the opportunity for all these skills, these behaviors, these attributes, these processes to come together, and just recognize there's a time and place. And, as much as we can do things well, maybe very often we don't get it right. Maybe a bit like my answer. I don't know.
Well, you can't waffle as much as Val and I do after 100 odd
I'll give it
episodes.
a good go.
just to add there, a quick Google, because Google knows everything. Accountability in terms of ethics and governance is equated with answerability, blameworthiness, liability, and the expectation of account giving. So it goes on to say a bit more. But one thing I've heard, I don't know if this is quite right, but an example of accountability and responsibility is if your doorbell rings and you go and you answer the door and there's a newborn baby on your doorstep, you might not have been accountable, but you are responsible for making the next decision, right? What do? Do nothing, phone the police, So Maybe that's an example, who knows. But anyway, look, gentlemen, thank you. We do want to have you back in the future because there's so many rabbit holes we haven't gone down. But before we head towards the end, we do have to make some space for our feature. And it's fiver. So Al, the last time you were with us on episode 47, it was tenner. We've cut that down, so yeah, you can breathe a sigh of relief. But it's just, 5 quick fire questions. I'll ask the question and then I'll go to Shaky first for your answer and then to Al. Just a quick pop quiz. So gentlemen, if you're ready.
Never ready, but go for it.
Fantastic. So I'll ask the question again. Shaky, you go first and then I'll get Al's answer. Question 1, steak, seafood or salad?
Steak.
Steak.
Question 2, are leaders born or made?
Made.
Made.
Question 3, what is one piece of advice for people new to the project profession?
Be yourself.
Be authentic.
Question 4, if you could start your career over, what would you do differently?
It's hypothetical. It's not going to happen, so I've just got to go with it.
Absolutely nothing.
Awesome. And question 5, which superpower would you choose to have for a day and why?
Can you ask me one about sports?
Could be a sporting superpower.
Pass? I don't know.
We'll accept.
I'm going to take a completely non-professional answer to this one. It's the ability to change the light so I can take the best picture I possibly can whenever I want to.
Brilliant. Here we go. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being such great sports, for sharing your insight. It's been amazing to kick the tires with the best part of an hour with you both. As I said, we'd love to have you both back. But before we let you go, any final thoughts? I'll start with you, Al.
No, I think thanks for having us, having me back and having Shaky on today. I think it's been great to bounce this around with you. Like you say, there's so much here. But no, thanks for the chance to just share some thinking.
Thank you, Al. Shaky?
No, I think just to reflect, Al, just thank you for the opportunity. I'm also sort of curious about what people are going to listen to, and almost dare I say it, what's their thoughts and feedbacks, and not get my apologies out there, but just curiosity to go.
Fantastic. Yeah, and folks, if you want to give Shaky feedback on LinkedIn, it's Alexander Shakespeare. So there you go. Val, any final thoughts for you?
No, thank you, gents. You held up your own when we had probably some tricky and curvy questions on the fly. We're too used to it after 100+ episodes, but thank you for being so candid and open and honest, and I look forward to having you back on the show.
Great, thank you.
Cheers, thanks very much.
Great, thanks guys. So folks, there you've heard it. It is all the time we have on this episode. But remember, if you like what you've heard, please do help us pay it forward and share a link to this episode on your favorite social media. A massive thank you once again to our guests, Al Simmonite, returning, and newly baptized, if we can put it in that way, Alexander Shaky Shakespeare. And thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me and Val, it's bye for now.